Sunday felt like the turning point. 200,000 people in Glendale, Arizona, hundreds of millions more watching from all over the world. And the most powerful people in the world.
It is being called a dark moment for America. The targeted shooting of conservative political activist Charlie Kirk during an outdoor event at Utah Valley University.
But it wouldn't trace to me. I'm worried about handprints. I had to leave it in a bush, though, where I changed outfits. I didn't have the ability or time.
What if the man accused of pulling the trigger wasn't the mastermind at all, but just the weapon in someone else's game? On a Sunday that drew thousands to a packed arena and millions more watching online, the moment was supposed to be about energy, politics, and influence. Instead, it became a turning point for the entire country. Because when Tyler James Robinson was dragged into that cold interrogation room, he didn't shout, he didn't beg, and he didn't even flinch. He leaned forward and whispered 3 words that froze the air. "They hired me." Those words ignited a storm that refuses to die down. Were they the desperate excuse of a guilty man, or the first breadcrumb in a conspiracy far bigger than anyone imagined? The day began like a celebration. Nearly 200,000 people packed into Glendale, Arizona, while millions more tuned in from around the world. The crowd was buzzing, the stage lights blazing, and the atmosphere felt like a rally that would set the tone for everything to come. At the center of it all stood Charlie Kirk, a conservative figure who had built a national following and whose words carried weight far beyond the arena walls. For his supporters, it was more than just an event. It felt like history in motion, a gathering where their voices mattered. Security was tight, but the energy of the crowd seemed unstoppable. Families waved signs, cameras flashed, and chants rolled like thunder through the venue. But beneath that wave of excitement, something else was unfolding. One man moved quietly in the background, unnoticed, blending in with the noise and the chaos. Hours later, his actions would rip through the country like an earthquake, turning what should have been a routine appearance into a moment that the nation would never forget. Because this wasn't just another rally. This was the spark that set off a storm that would pit family against family, fracture trust in institutions, and drag an entire nation into the shadows of a question no one was prepared to answer. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the surveillance camera in the corner. Tyler James Robinson sat in an orange jumpsuit, wrists chained to a cold metal table, his eyes locked straight ahead. Detectives leaned in, expecting denial, excuses, maybe even a breakdown. Instead, Robinson gave them something they could never have prepared for. Pressed to explain why he did it, he leaned forward, cuffs clinking, and in a voice steady enough to send a chill through the room, he said 3 words. "They hired me." Not shouted, not mumbled, spoken with the kind of calm that makes you believe he meant every syllable. And in that instant, the case flipped on its head. Those words didn't stay trapped in the interrogation room for long. Once they leaked, they spread like wildfire. Commentators replayed the clip. Journalists dissected every pause. Online, the phrase twisted into something darker. "They used me." His mugshot flooded timelines, captioned with those words like a warning. And suddenly, this wasn't the story of one angry young man. It became something else. A possible conspiracy. A chilling suggestion that Robinson wasn't acting alone, but playing a part in a game controlled by people hidden in the shadows. If Robinson was telling the truth, the question was terrifying. Who had loaded the weapon? And why? But if he was lying, then he'd just thrown the entire investigation into chaos, planting a smoke bomb powerful enough to blur the truth before the trial even began. Either way, the impact was undeniable. Robinson's confession was no longer just a moment in an interrogation room. It was the spark that lit a nationwide firestorm. Before the confession went public, Tyler Robinson looked like a troubled but ordinary 24-year-old. On paper, he was an underachieving student, known for heated online rants and a family divided straight down the middle. His father stood proudly with conservative voices like Charlie Kirk, while Tyler drifted into online spaces that mocked and tore those same figures apart. What started as dinner table arguments soon turned into silence, slammed doors, and the kind of bitterness that never seemed to end. But behind those doors, something darker was brewing. Late at night, Robinson buried himself in shadowy forums and encrypted chats. Places where anger wasn't just vented, it was fed. These weren't harmless debates. They were echo chambers of rage, where faceless voices pushed frustration into fanaticism. When his words, "they hired me," hit the internet, the reaction was instant. Hashtags erupted. His photo, stamped with the phrase, "they used me," became impossible to escape. Conspiracy threads spread like wildfire, and what might have been seen as another lone wolf tragedy suddenly turned into a national obsession. For prosecutors, it was simple: a rage-filled loner who finally snapped. But online, that narrative collapsed in seconds. Was Robinson really a monster acting alone, or had he just pulled back the curtain on something much bigger? The storm wasn't just digital chatter anymore. Families of people mentioned in old tweets and memes suddenly faced harassment. Strangers were doxxed. Entire communities got dragged into the chaos. And as the noise grew louder, one thing became clear. This case wasn't staying inside a courtroom. It had already spilled into every corner of American life. If the internet had already turned Robinson's words into a firestorm, the media poured gasoline on it. The first explosion came not from the courtroom, but from a television studio. Conservative commentator Mark Levin took to the airwaves and dropped what he called inside intel. According to him, Robinson hadn't just admitted to pulling the trigger. He had named a federal agency. That revelation hit like a bomb. Within hours, clips of the broadcast were chopped, shared, and replayed millions of times. To some, it felt like proof of their worst suspicions, that powerful forces inside the government itself might have had a hand in silencing Charlie Kirk. The reaction was immediate and polarizing. Supporters shouted that Levin had finally exposed the truth, while critics slammed the segment as reckless, warning that it could poison the entire investigation before a jury even heard the evidence. News anchors debated it on split screens, hashtags surged to the top of trending lists, and the phrase "inside job" started showing up everywhere from podcasts to protest signs. But whether you believed it or not, the damage was done. Public trust in the official narrative was shattered. People weren't just asking if Robinson acted alone anymore. They were asking if the government itself had blood on its hands. And just as the outrage reached a boiling point, a new leak would push the storm to an even darker place. Just when it seemed the debate couldn't get any louder, the leaks began. A redacted police report surfaced online, confirming what many had already whispered. Robinson had named people during his interrogation. The names were blacked out, but the damage was immediate. To the public, those thick black lines weren't protection. They were proof that someone, somewhere, was hiding the truth. The internet pounced. Amateur sleuths dissected every page, analyzing timestamps, travel logs, and even old social media posts, convinced they could connect the dots the authorities wouldn't. Forums filled with theories. Some swore the redacted names pointed to political figures. Others insisted it had to be insiders with access to security details. And with every delay in the official investigation, suspicion only grew. Silence from law enforcement was treated not as caution, but as confirmation that something was being buried. Even experts started weighing in. Former FBI profiler Dr. Rebecca Haynes told television audiences that Robinson's calm, deliberate tone in his confession wasn't the sound of a man scrambling for an excuse. It was a breadcrumb trail begging to be followed. Meanwhile, cybercrime units quietly combed through encrypted chats and deleted files, hunting for proof that Robinson had help. By the end of the week, the case had grown into something far larger than a single man with a gun. It was no longer just about a murder. It was about whether Robinson was the tip of an iceberg, an exposed edge of a network that had been hiding in the shadows all along. And just when investigators thought they had seen the worst, a second interrogation video would leak, one that would change everything. The second leaked video was nothing like the first. Gone was the calm, collected Robinson who had whispered, "They hired me." This time he was furious, slamming his cuffed hands against the table, eyes blazing as he shouted, "You think I did this on my own? Someone told me where he'd be. Someone told me when." The shift was jarring. For millions watching online, the question was no longer if he had help. It was who. Who gave him Charlie Kirk's private schedule? Who fed him the details no outsider should have known? Investigators dove into his digital life, tearing apart hard drives, cloud accounts, and encrypted chats. What they found was chilling. Folders that looked less like a diary and more like an operation. Messages that read like orders. "He'll speak tomorrow. Be prepared." Another one. "They will call you a monster, but history will know." But the real bombshell came when forensic analysts uncovered documents listing not only Kirk's public appearances, but private, unadvertised events known only to his inner circle. To security experts, that discovery wasn't speculation. It was proof. Robinson had insider intel. Either someone close to Kirk had leaked it, or a network with frightening reach had slipped past security protocols entirely. And with that revelation, the lone wolf theory collapsed. This wasn't random. It looked coordinated. Retired Secret Service agents hit the airwaves with a chilling warning. This is not how lone wolves operate. This is how networks operate. The country, already on edge, suddenly faced a darker possibility. If Robinson wasn't acting alone, then the real story wasn't about one man with a gun. It was about the invisible hands that may have guided him every step of the way. And soon, the names behind those shadows would begin to surface. The speculation hit a fever pitch when hackers escalated the chaos. Screenshots of what they claimed were unredacted police files flooded forums and social media. For the first time, names appeared on the screen. 3 individuals allegedly tied to Robinson's interrogation notes. 2 had loose links to political groups. Another was said to be a former federal contractor. The fallout was instant. Protesters swarmed state houses demanding arrests. Innocent people with the same last names suddenly faced harassment, threats, even police protection. Online mobs treated rumor as fact, targeting strangers in the middle of the night. Neighborhoods turned into war zones of suspicion. The media fractured. Some outlets refused to print the names at all, calling them unverified and dangerous. Others tiptoed around heavy implications. A few went all in, flashing the names in bold headlines. And then came the true shockwave. An investigative report hinting that one of those named wasn't some random connection, but allegedly tied to a major political campaign. That suggestion set Washington on fire. Politicians scrambled to issue denials, release statements, and distance themselves from anyone even rumored to be involved. Legal analysts filled TV panels explaining that if a campaign insider had leaked private security details, the case wasn't just murder anymore. It could cross into conspiracy or even terrorism. And while the political world melted down, the courtroom was preparing for its own explosion. Prosecutors quietly slipped new digital evidence into the record. Handwritten notes pulled from Robinson's deleted files. One read, "Don't lose focus." Another, "This is more important than you." And the most chilling of all, "He is the target, not the cause." Those words didn't sound like the scribbles of a mastermind. They sounded like instructions, proof that Robinson may have truly seen himself as nothing more than a pawn in someone else's deadly game. But if that was true, then the trial wasn't just about what Robinson had done. It was about uncovering the forces that may have been hiding in the shadows all along. When the trial finally opened, it felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a national spectacle. Millions tuned in to live streams, desperate to see the clash unfold. Security footage showed Robinson strolling onto campus, the weapon hidden in his bag, moving with an eerie calm that prosecutors said proved premeditation. Jurors shifted uncomfortably as blurred clips of the aftermath flickered on screen. bone-chilling even with the details obscured. The prosecution's case was blunt. Robinson had coldly and deliberately pulled the trigger. They painted him as a young man consumed by rage, hiding behind excuses to dodge accountability. Encrypted chat logs were paraded before the jury, filled with violent language that prosecutors insisted revealed his intent. But the defense stunned everyone with their opening strategy. They didn't deny Robinson had fired the fatal shot. They admitted it outright. Their argument was different. He hadn't acted alone. He had been manipulated, coaxed, and fed information by faceless voices that wanted Charlie Kirk gone without dirtying their own hands. Robinson, they argued, wasn't the mastermind. He was the weapon. Digital experts took the stand, pointing out that some of the very messages prosecutors leaned on came from accounts later erased, leaving no trace of who was truly behind them. The possibility of coercion, even fabrication, hung heavy over the courtroom. Then came the defense's hammer blow, a surprise witness. A former member of Robinson's shadowy online circles stepped forward, swearing under oath that private conversations about targeting Charlie Kirk had circulated months before the shooting. Some brushed them off as twisted jokes, but others carried eerie precision, even hinting at knowledge of Kirk's private, unadvertised movements. The courtroom froze. Jurors leaned in. Reporters scribbled frantically. In that moment, the line between lone wolf and conspiracy blurred beyond recognition. Robinson might have been the one who pulled the trigger, but if the witness was telling the truth, someone else may have loaded the weapon. And soon, the jury would decide whether Robinson was a monster in his own right, or just the pawn in a much larger, darker game. When the jury finally returned, the air inside the courtroom felt heavier than stone. Reporters braced their pens, families clutched each other's hands, and all eyes locked on Robinson. The foreperson stood, voice steady as the word echoed across the chamber. Guilty of aggravated murder. The gallery erupted. Gasps, sobs, and frantic whispers ricocheted off the walls. Some saw it as justice served, a clear end to a brutal crime. Others felt only dread, convinced the real story hadn't even been touched. Robinson sat motionless, staring straight ahead, his face unreadable. No tears, no outbursts, just the same eerie calm that had haunted every stage of the case. To many watching, it wasn't the face of a man defeated. It was the face of someone who still believed he had only played his part. Outside the courthouse, the country was more divided than ever. One faction rallied behind banners demanding swift punishment. Justice for Charlie. Across the street, counter-protesters shouted that Robinson was a pawn, a scapegoat sacrificed to protect powerful figures still hiding in the shadows. Families on both sides became unwilling symbols. Charlie Kirk's loved ones pleaded for peace, reminding the world that he wasn't just a political name, but a son and a brother. Robinson's family begged for mercy, claiming Tyler had been manipulated, insisting he was unstable and not in control of his actions. Neither voice was loud enough to cut through the storm. And then came the haunting echo that refused to fade. They used me. Even after the verdict, those words trended online, stamped on protest signs, replayed in endless clips, and repeated in hushed tones across the nation. The trial had ended, but closure never came. If Robinson was lying, then the chaos he created may have been his final weapon. But if he was telling the truth, then the most dangerous players, the ones pulling the strings, never even stepped into the courtroom. So where does that leave us? A guilty verdict, a grieving family, and a country more fractured than ever. But the bigger question hasn't gone away. Was Tyler James Robinson really the mastermind of a brutal act? Or was he just the trigger finger in a game designed by people we still can't see? His words, "They used me," continue to echo, a phrase that refuses to die. Maybe it was nothing more than a desperate excuse. Maybe it was a breadcrumb pointing toward something far more dangerous. And that's the part that should concern everyone. Because if Robinson was right, then the real story isn't over. The real players are still out there, hidden in the shadows, waiting for their next move. So I'll leave you with this. Was Robinson a lone monster, or just the weapon someone else loaded and fired? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story is far from finished.